the duplex, the triplex, fourplex, courtyard apartments, the bungalow court, townhouses. All these housing choices in the middle, we've really delivered very little of in the last 4 to 5 decades. In the late 20s, 30s, and 40s, when zoning was ramping up and being applied, the percentage of housing that was missing middle being delivered starts to get less and less. We don't have a development industry set up to deliver these missing middle housing types in the way that we have an entire development industry, where the single family homes, basically this exact same building size, by dividing it up in different ways, you can get either one really large unit or 8 smaller units. Zoning's currently functioning with a 100-year-old operating system. I'm Dan Parolek. I am an architect and urban designer, and I'm the founding principal of Opticos Design, a multidisciplinary practice based in Berkeley, California. My book, Missing Middle Housing, Thinking Big and Building Small to Respond to Today's Housing Crisis.
I have the book here in case I need to fact check.
Missing middle housing is a topic that I'm very passionate about. I first introduced this concept in 2011 as part of an article I wrote, created the missing middle diagram that seems to be everywhere these days. In 2016, we launched a free online resource, missingmiddlehousing.com. I practiced architecture in New York City for a number of years. I have an undergraduate degree in architecture, got a master's degree in urban design, Opticos Design. Practice that focused both on architecture as well as planning and urban design. And our work is about half with municipalities doing downtown plans, TOD plan, the rewriting of the zoning code to enable those plans and enable missing middle. And then the other half of our work is for developers across the country to deliver this missing middle housing, both the for sale and rental markets.
You kind of play the role in the middle between developer, architect, various departments of the city.
Absolutely. I can open up a zoning code and maybe a city adopted a new form-based code, and I know what they're looking for, and the zoning code is the biggest barrier for these delivery of these missing middle types. Why is this discussion about missing middle housing so important? There's an affordable housing crisis in every corner of the country right now. It's only getting bigger. Zoning has played a role in creating this racial wealth gap between Black households and white households. There's shifting household demographics that are an important part of this story of shrinking household sizes, and 30% of households are single person, growing percentage of households without children. In 2030, 1 in 5 Americans will be over 65. 2/3 of millennials and 1/3 of baby boomers want walkable urban living. High demand and low supply is a pretty easy economic equation to high prices. Our zoning system is really out of date. Our zoning has allowed a lot of really bad infill. It built a lot of distrust in communities. Almost anybody that sees this diagram, whether they have a planning background or if they're just a community member, they understand it. The left-hand side of this is development industries are set up to deliver single-family detached housing. And over the course of the last 15 to 20 years, larger 4, 5, 6+ story apartments or condos. But it's all these housing choices in the middle we've really delivered very little of in the last 4 to 5 decades. The duplex, the triplex, fourplex, courtyard apartments, the bungalow courts, the townhouses. Go into any neighborhood built prior to the 1940s and see a mix of these types. You have to look very closely to notice that these aren't just single family homes, and 10% of all housing units produced between 1990 and 2013 were missing middle scale. I really like to use this image and tell this story, create a master plan for the community of Isla Vista. The community is not going to support a rewrite of the zoning. That's more than 17 units per acre. Everybody in the group loved this building. Place the existing zoning with the form-based code to enable this type of housing. Would you support it? And they're like, well, of course we would. And so this building that you all love is 52 units per acre. It completely blew them away. This is just a really great example of a recently built triplex. We knew how to deliver these missing middle types historically. In the early 1900s, you used to be able to pick up a Sears and Roebuck catalog, buy a 4-plex or 6-plex or even an 8-plex and have it delivered to your curbside. And unfortunately, we've come a long way in the wrong direction for the efficient delivery of these types. A broad range of barriers that exist for missing middle housing start with zoning and subsidies for suburban single family development. Just put layer after layer of barrier on these types. And the buy right point is really important. Part of the big problem is very subjective, cumbersome and expensive process to work through entitlement, and it becomes a negotiation. Transactional zoning. Fortunately, too many cities up and down California as well as across the United States. That's kind of what they do. It just makes it too hard to deliver housing, period, too risky and too expensive especially for smaller and medium-sized builders. We don't have a development industry set up to deliver these missing middle housing types in the way that we have an entire development industry, a finance industry, a mortgage industry set up to deliver the single family homes. And part of this process needs to be rebuilding those industries. The barriers in places like California is also this construction defect liability. If it's a builder or developer who wants to just build a fourplex condo, it's really hard to justify taking on that risk of getting sued for that 4-unit building because the financial reward is not nearly as high. The code just inherently doesn't understand building type. They say fourplex, but they actually the 4 tall, skinny single family homes on one lot are sort of fit under that category. And so I think they're really confusing the conversation about like what is a type. Rewriting zoning, we start by introducing this full range of missing middle housing types, shifting the conversation away from those typical terms of density and FAR and those other metrics and say, let's first talk about like this broad range of housing types so we can refer back to the duplex, the cottage court, the live work townhouse courtyard building. A form-based code approach steps away from random metrics of density and FAR, lot coverage, have really good intent, but they don't predictably deliver good results. Shift the conversation to form and scale, and more specifically, this broad range of housing types. A zoning district will say, instead of saying you have a density of 20 units per acre or an FAR of 1.5, it'll actually say in this missing middle neighborhood zone, you're allowed to do this range of types. This is a form-based zone district called neighborhood small footprint. Within those regulations, sort of this table on the right, which of these missing middle types allowed in that particular zoning district. It is very graphic. We usually start this process out by collecting photographs and creating poster boards for each of the types. But they don't understand zoning enough to sort of dive into that code and assess the code, but they can point to a photograph of the cottage court and say, hey, I really like this type. The replacement of that zoning district with a number of different form-based zones that will deliver a broad range of housing types, allowed to do a courtyard apartment. It's just really direct about what types are desired and then it regulates the form sort of as the output. There has to be a minimum lot width for each of the types to be applicable. For each of the types, there's a minimum lot size. Between 40 and 50 feet is when the sort of allowance of the fourplex is triggered. The lot width, for example, has to be at least 75 feet wide to allow the cottage court.
The next step of delivery that zoning needs to do.
Because most zoning districts will define this really big allowed envelope, the neighborhood and the cities like holding their breath that the developer will actually come in and do the right thing instead of the regulations just prescribing and being really direct about what is wanted, and so more predictable results for the community, the neighborhood, but also predictability for the developer. If they meet the requirements of this new form-based code, their path to entitlement should be much clearer and more objective.
How does it tie to the parcel map and the zoning code?
On the lot, it'll say, hey, this is in a mixed housing district. Either we would go into that R3 zone and make really targeted changes, or that R3 zone is completely replaced with this new zoning district that it could be called missing middle housing. It could be called mixed housing. These missing middle regulations are not an added layer, but rather that they are embedded and are the core set of regulations. The last thing you want to do is make it even more complicated. And when we created the missing middle concept, our primary goal was to enable infill, but there's also a really strong interest in this for the creation of new walkable neighborhoods that integrate missing middle types. A project that we've been working on now for 4 years, which is the construction of a new missing middle neighborhood in the Omaha metro called Prairie Queen. And it's one of the case studies that I included in the book. It's a 40-acre project that will ultimately be a little over 600 units, and it's all missing middle scale from duplexes and townhouses up to eightplexes. There are 132 units occupied, probably another 75 to 100 in various stages of construction. It's been very financially successful. Evolved from a a project area scale, like a neighborhood or a corridor, to a citywide and even a countywide scale. Kauai County, city of Memphis, Tennessee, the city of Cincinnati. We've done this up and down the state and are going through, policy changes and even legislators, to be quite honest. I think this is a really important message for the legislation. Instead of targeting number of units, to target the sort of a defined volume or envelope by dividing it up in different ways, right? You can get either one really large unit or 8 smaller units, have a really broad range of densities that it's delivering, but the scale and the form of it's exactly the same. So let's focus on defining that maximum volume you want to allow, and then letting a developer decide how many units they divide that volume up into. But they can deliver smaller, more attainable housing choices. You remove the disincentive for delivering the smaller units.
This is more of a affordability by design, not by law. Our cities also include deed restrictions, like an inclusionary zoning aspect of it. If you're going to go and turn a single family home into a sixplex, some of those have to be affordable, or is it mostly just allowing the higher density to happen and affordable by design?
We discourage cities from asking to overlay inclusionary requirements onto the missing middle scale buildings, because it's already really hard to make them pencil out, and by adding the inclusionary zoning, that it's likely to make it even harder. If a developer is going to be able to buy a $1.2 million cottage and tear that down and build 4 or 5 new cottages that have values of $1.4+ million, then math probably works out to have a requirement where that would end up sort of have to have some sort of a long-term affordability tied to them. Management of those becomes the $1 million question. A land trust that sort of takes over management of a larger pod of sort of scattered affordable types, but the middle, it is delivering this affordability by design if it's enabled.
The inclusionary zoning is very prevalent with like a 20 unit plus, where, if you want to build a bigger project, you have to have a set aside. There's no inclusionary zoning component to anything in this missing middle typology.
No, I think it's just harder the project to pencil out. One that's included, the city may, for example, need to require a few more units in certain areas to make the project pencil out. Maybe they need to allow a 6-plex rather than a 4-plex and really deliver housing choices. Working on the citywide zoning code update for Austin, Texas, and it adjusts the required sort of give back, a sort of percentage of affordability or number of affordable units based on the location within the city, as well as whether you're not developing a rental project or a for sale project.
These communities have built triplexes and duplexes and added that supply to the market. How much research construction of missing middle typologies actually leading to more affordable housing opportunity? It's renting or selling at a discount to what the current, average home price is.
Conversation is too new to sort of have that data. I don't think the entire solution is to just let missing middle happen and hope it delivers affordability. No, I think there needs to be a lot of other tools in a city's toolbox. And enough of it hasn't been built to sort of start thinking about not calling it missing.
And a lot of these typologies you're highlighting, a lot of this is sort of tied intrinsically back to like the 15-minute city bungalow court. It's like, where are you going to park the cars? And so
absolutely. To demonstrate the demand for car light, in particular, car-free living, is a project that we're now working on with a developer called Cul-de-sac in Tempe, Arizona, a 20-acre project that will be the largest car-free community in the country. The first phase has over 100 units. There's over 2,000 people on a waiting list that want to live in this car-free community, and people are moving from all across the country to live this car-free lifestyle. So part of my point is, number one, cities need to tackle the parking conversation to enable missing middle as well, and that there is a pent-up demand for car-free and even car light living that is not being delivered. We designed in Salt Lake City. All of these units were actually sold before they were even completed. About 15 to 20% smaller than what was being built in that market, and sort of hit a sweet spot of the construction industry is discussing sort of this need for these housing types as well, and is struggling a bit to adapt to kind of meet this need just based on the complexities being outside of their business plan, all the barriers that are currently in place to effectively deliver these missing middle housing choices. There's this big push, right, to update housing elements are not a sharp instrument, they're a really blunt tool. If conventional planning and zoning and policy could deliver missing middle type it would have already. There's an inherent disincentive for smaller, more affordable units in a density-based planning and zoning system. Because the second you define a density cap, developers is going to do his math and say, hey, I can fit 4 units on here. You're not going to build 4 affordable, smaller units. He or she is going to build 4 of the biggest, most expensive units. Give them the same envelope and say, hey, you can do as many units as you want within that defined envelope. So instead of doing 4,000 square foot units, you could do 8 500 square foot unit. 3/4 of all city-driven RFPs that come out for zoning code updates ask directly for form-based coding or say, we're interested in exploring it. If your zoning says allows the right things in the right places, that it's gonna be an economic development tool.
If people are going to reimagine how their communities are built, they literally need the images for it to be imagined. The book illustrates and kind of fills in that missing space in a lot of people's imagination.
My call to action is for everybody to step up and play a role in cities across the country to deliver these housing choices.
Dan, thank you so much for your time.
All right, take care.